The message came at 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday. No greeting, no lead-in, just my father's voice measured and clipped like a business memo. Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. That was it. 18 words. 18 syllables if you count the pause before he hung up. I replayed it once, not because I didn't believe it, but because for some reason I expected to feel something bigger. A spike of rage, a punch in the chest, something. But all I felt was stillness. Like the part of me that had been quietly bracing for this had finally heard what it always knew. My name is Haley Brooks. I'm the youngest of two. My father, Walter, built Brooks Automotive from the ground up first as a mechanic, then a franchise owner, then a regional chain operator. My older brother, Ryan, is the heir he always wanted. Charismatic, reckless, untouchable. And me, I was the one who kept the lights on quietly, efficiently, invisibly. I didn't call back that night. I didn't ask why. I didn't even forward the voicemail to my mother, Linda, who historically stayed out of business matters when they became inconvenient. I just texted him 2 words understood. Then I opened my laptop signed into the loan portal I hadn't touched in months and did what I knew none of them expected me to do. I removed my name, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of clarity. 2 years earlier, when the family business needed to secure a $2.5 million expansion loan, the bank asked for a secondary applicant with impeccable credit. Ryan had debt. Walter had leverage. I had clean numbers and a Stanford MBA. They didn't beg me to sign. They simply handed me the papers assumed I would, and I did. Because back then, I still thought loyalty earned belonging. But now, sitting alone at my kitchen table, the voicemail playing faintly in the background, I realized something else entirely. They hadn't cut me off. They'd simply confirmed what they'd been quietly doing for years. And this time, I was ready to finish the sentence for them. I used to think my father loved order more than anything, but over time I realized it wasn't order, it was control. Walter Brooks built Brooks Automotive the same way he built our house. Brick by brick, rule by rule, with no room for softness. The garage came first, the family came second, sometimes third. He had a saying, one he liked to repeat in front of employees and even more in front of us. We don't hire outsiders, we raise replacements. And that's what Ryan and I were potential successors, at least in theory. Ryan was 3 years older, louder, bolder, and always walking just slightly out of reach of responsibility. But he had the charm Walter respected, a swagger my father recognized in himself. So Ryan got the praise, the second chances, the leeway. I got the clipboard. By 12, I was logging tire shipments into QuickBooks. By 16, I was managing payroll at the third location during spring break. I didn't ask, I was told. No thank yous, no questions, just the unspoken expectation that I'd be wherever the business needed me available, obedient, tireless. My mother, Linda, wasn't cruel. She simply disappeared inside her role, hosting dinners, folding invoices into envelopes, smiling through meetings, then pulling me aside after to remind me your father's building something for us. Be grateful, sweetheart. So I was, or I tried to be. I studied hard, got my MBA, turned down a corporate logistics offer in Denver because Walter said family before ambition. He needed someone to help with the regional expansion. Ryan apparently was focusing on vision. I focused on everything else. When the opportunity came to secure funding for a new headquarters, I negotiated the lease, compared rates across 6 banks, landed a deal with favorable terms and a 3-year interest lock. But the bank wanted a second signer. Ryan couldn't. His credit was trashed. Walter didn't want to jeopardize personal assets, so they turned to me. No big speech, no dinner, just the papers on the table and a pen already uncapped. I hesitated maybe for half a second. Then I signed because somewhere inside I still believed that if I showed I was loyal enough and dispensable enough, they'd finally see me not as the backup plan, but as part of the plan. Of course, they never said thank you. They just assumed it was my job. That was 2 years ago. I thought I was investing in a future we'd share. I didn't know then I was just making myself useful enough to be invisible. And if you're quiet long enough, you start to believe that invisibility is a kind of love. It's not. It's just silence mistaken for peace. The first crack didn't sound like breaking. It sounded like laughter, Ryan's laughter to be exact. We were in a quarterly budget meeting, just the three of us, me, Ryan, and Walter. I had flagged a vendor invoice, $12,000 duplicated over 3 months. A clear error. Or at least I thought so. That's from a friend of mine, Ryan said, waving it off like it was lint on his collar. Let it slide. He gives us good rates elsewhere. I looked to my father expecting something, a raised brow, maybe a single word of scrutiny. But Walter didn't flinch. He just reached for his coffee and said, "Focus on bigger things, Haley. Stop acting like an outsider." Outsider. That word didn't just sting. It settled somewhere under my skin. I wasn't some recent hire. I had overseen logistics for 4 site expansions, renegotiated our fleet lease at half the original cost, and kept payroll balanced through 2 supply chain disruptions. And yet, when I questioned anything that didn't involve spreadsheets or silent compliance, I became foreign. After that meeting, things changed subtly. At first, my access to our back-end systems began to narrow. I couldn't log into vendor platforms. Then, the financial dashboard redirected me to a read-only page. The company credit card tied to my name expired. It was never replaced. Every time I asked, I got the same answer: we're restructuring or temporary system changes, or worse, don't worry about it. And yet I noticed Ryan had a new standing desk, a company-paid trip to Miami labeled as Leadership Summit, and an office chair that cost more than my first used car. Something shifted inside me. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet alertness. The kind that comes when your instincts whisper they are preparing a door for you, and it only opens one way. I started keeping copies of everything: internal spending reports, meeting notes, emails where Ryan copied clients but signed using my name. At night, I organized them into a private folder on my home computer. One I called Shadow Ledger. I wasn't sure yet what I was building, just that I needed to hold on to truth while it was still in my hands. One evening, I reached out to Dana Keller, a former classmate from law school. We'd lost touch for years until she helped her sister escape a messy divorce from a real estate partnership. I didn't tell Dana everything, just enough to ask a simple question. If a co-signer withdraws from a business loan, what happens? Her pause was telling. Depends. If you're not a guarantor and you weren't involved in recent misuse, the loan can be reevaluated without your name. Quietly, legally. I exhaled. At that moment, I didn't know whether I was planning an exit or building an alibi. What I did know finally was that the story I thought I was living, the loyal daughter keeping the legacy afloat, wasn't mine anymore. They weren't just pushing me out. They were doing it slowly enough to keep cashing in on my silence. It was a Thursday morning in early spring when the final piece clicked into place. The trees outside my office window were just starting to bud. I remember that detail clearly because something about new leaves made what I was about to find feel even more stale. I had just received my monthly credit summary, something I reviewed out of habit more than worry, but this time a line item stood out: Brooks Holdings Deferred Payment Review. I hadn't seen that name used in years. It was a shell corporation Walter once created for real estate holdings dormant. Or so I thought. Curious, I dug deeper. What I found wasn't surprising. It was worse. The expansion loan I had co-signed 2 years ago, the one used to launch Brooks Automotive's new regional headquarters, was in arrears, 3 payments late. The business was behind, barely floating on grace periods and delayed vendor invoices. My name was still on the loan, and worse yet, it was being cited in communications with creditors as a reason to extend goodwill because my credit was clean. Because my finances were untouched, because I was, as always, the reliable one. But I hadn't seen a financial report in months. I hadn't been included in a board meeting since last fall, and the last time I asked Ryan for an update, he replied with a winking emoji. And no worries, sis. Big vision coming. Vision didn't pay the bills. I pulled up archived records, traced invoices back 6 quarters, compared spending against budget projections I had written myself. And then I saw it: over $40,000 in consulting fees, all funneled through a friend of Ryan's. Several entries labeled marketing testing had no campaigns tied to them. Fleet repairs, triple billed, and vendor quotes signed with my initials, ones I never approved. It wasn't mismanagement, it was orchestration. That same day, I met with Dana again, this time in person. We sat across from each other in a quiet booth at a coffee shop she liked near the courthouse. I showed her everything. She flipped through the documents, slowly, lips pressed, eyes steady. When she reached the co-signed loan agreement, she stopped. "You're not listed as a guarantor," she said. I blinked. "Meaning what?" "Meaning they used your name to secure it, but you're not legally bound if you withdraw before restructuring. And if I do..." Dana set down the papers, folded her hands, and said something I've never forgotten. "You don't need to confront them. Don't warn. Don't scream. Just move the brick holding up their wall and let it fall." I went home that evening and opened the folder I had renamed. No longer Shadow Ledger, now Redemption Plan. Inside were PDFs, flagged emails, account screenshots, and a draft letter Dana had helped me write weeks earlier, back when I still hesitated. I didn't hesitate anymore. They hadn't just pushed me out. They had used me until they assumed I had no more left to give. And maybe I didn't. But I had one thing left to take: my name. It took 4 minutes. That's how long the portal stayed open once I logged in using the administrative credentials I had created 2 years ago. Back when I still had full access, back when I thought I was building something real. The screen flickered once, then showed a notice: co-applicant status active. Modification options available. I clicked remove. Then I uploaded the signed withdrawal letter Dana and I had finalized 3 weeks earlier. I typed in my PIN. Submitted. No alarms sounded. No confirmation emails. Just a quiet message in gray text at the bottom of the screen. Update received. Processing pending compliance review. It was done. The next step was risk control. I emailed the bank's loan manager, a man named Keith Carter, someone I'd negotiated with during the expansion phase. I attached a summary of financial discrepancies, vendor fraud, altered signatures, and access restrictions indicating internal exclusion. I was careful, clear, professional. What I didn't include was emotion. Within the hour, the bank froze the operating account tied to Brooks Holdings and triggered an internal review of the loan. Quietly. No call to my father, no memo to Ryan, just a pause, a blinking cursor in their system where once there had been blind trust. While they scrambled, I moved. I contacted my personal accountant, Sarah Kim, someone I trusted from my grad school years. We reviewed my exposure RAN simulations on worst-case scenarios. She confirmed what Dana had said: no liability, no credit damage, not even a legal obligation to notify them. The trust I had moved my savings into last month was protected. That night, for the first time in years, I left my phone on silent and actually meant it. I slept. When I woke up the next morning, there were already 32 missed calls. By mid-afternoon, there were 78 from my mother, 13 from my father, 7 from Ryan, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize until I played the voicemail. It was George Maddox, their longtime company accountant. His voice was high-pitched, panicked, almost cracking. "Haley, call me now. This is serious. The loan's collapsing. The bank pulled support. We're at risk of default. You need to fix this. Do you hear me? You have to fix this." I listened to it twice, not because I didn't understand what he meant, but because it sounded like justice. And justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't scream, it echoes. By early evening, Ryan sent his first text. "What the hell did you do?" And then another, "You're overreacting." We could have handled this internally, but the word "we" didn't land anymore. There hadn't been a "we" in a long time. Later that night, my mother left a voicemail, not angry, but quiet, trembling. "Sweetheart, what's happening? Your father says the bank froze everything, that they might recall the loan. Did you sign something I did but I didn't explain?" I called her back, let the line ring twice. "I removed my name, that's all." Her breath caught. "But you can't just do that." "Actually, I can," I said. "And I did." She paused. "Haley, this affects all of us." "No," I replied calmly. "You made sure it didn't." And then I hung up, not in anger, in completion. They picked the restaurant we used to go to for birthdays. Maggie's old brick walls, too many ceiling fans, and the private room near the fireplace where we'd once blown out candles and clinked glasses of ginger ale. But there were no balloons, this time, no cake, just my parents, Walter and Linda, sitting stiff at one end of the table, and Ryan staring at his phone, pretending this was beneath him. There was also an empty chair waiting for me, as if they still believed I could be summoned. I arrived 15 minutes late on purpose. I wore gray slacks and a button-down blouse, neutral unreadable. Dana had once told me power doesn't shout, it arrives without apology. Ryan stood when I entered. "Thanks for coming." "I didn't come for you," I said, taking the chair slowly. "Let's not waste each other's time." Walter leaned forward, eyes fixed on mine. "You made your point loud and clear." "No," I said, voice calm. "The bank made my point. I just stopped protecting your lie." His jaw tightened. Linda shifted uncomfortably. "We're trying to hold this together," he said. "You think you're punishing us, Haley, but you're punishing the legacy your grandfather built." I looked at him steady. "Grandpa built a garage. You turned it into a dictatorship." Ryan scoffed. "Oh, come on. We gave you everything. You gave me a job," I said, meeting his gaze. Not a voice. The silence that followed was dense, almost warm, like a room that had finally stopped pretending to be anything else. Then, "Linda," my mother spoke almost in a whisper. "What do you want?" "Haley." That was the question, wasn't it? Not revenge. I had already taken that. What I wanted now was clarity. I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This is a signed affidavit confirming I've permanently withdrawn from the company loan, the board, and all business operations. You will never use my name again." Walter opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'm not finished." I took a breath. "I'm also submitting an anonymous tip to the state auditor. There are funds, missing vendors, unpaid payroll inconsistencies." I slid the envelope forward. "It's your mess now, fully legally." Ryan's face turned red. "You're destroying us over ego." "I'm not destroying anything," I said, standing. "I'm just removing the illusion that I was ever part of it." I turned toward the door. Behind me, for the first time in my life, my father said the one word I never expected to hear. "Haley, please." I paused, not from hesitation, but from satisfaction. "You left a voicemail telling me we were done," I said without turning around. "I'm just agreeing with you formally." And then I left. The story made it into the papers, not the big ones, just a quiet piece in a local business digest. Brooks Automotive faces financial turmoil amid internal disputes. I didn't leak it, but I knew who did. Dana called me 2 days later, her voice half serious, half smiling. When people lose power, she said they look for someone to blame. They just didn't expect that person to have already walked away. After that, the voicemails turned sharp. "From my father, you ungrateful child. We built that business for you. You're ruining your future. From Ryan, you think you're clever, but you'll need us someday. From George Maddox, the accountant. Do you even understand what this means? You've destroyed their legacy." But here's the thing no one said out loud. They destroyed it long before I pulled out. They destroyed it when they used my name, but denied me a seat at the table. When they decided I was a threat, not a daughter, when they made me invisible. Now the loan was caving in. The accounts frozen, the vendor contracts unraveling, and me, I was untouched. No legal blowback, no financial damage, my credit intact, my savings secure. I forwarded the last voicemail to Dana, then deleted the rest. I took my phone off silent, and for the first time in years, it stayed quiet. No crisis, no requests, no fires that only I could put out. I moved into a small loft in downtown Seattle. Nothing fancy, just sunlight, clean windows, and space enough for both a desk and peace. I started consulting quietly, helping small women-led startups avoid the kind of traps I'd lived through. Not because I needed purpose, but because I already had it. 3 months later, an envelope arrived at my new address. No return name, just the bank's logo and a tracking barcode. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "This letter confirms that the commercial loan associated with Haley Brooks has been formally withdrawn and restructured. No further obligation remains, no action required. No thank you, no apology, no spin, just a line drawn in ink in law and finally in truth." I placed the letter in a folder marked complete and slid it into the back of the cabinet. That night, I lit a candle by the window. The loft was quiet. The city below hummed unaware and alive. I thought of that voicemail one last time. "Don't bother coming to the reunion. We're cutting ties." They wanted silence, obedience absence, and they got all three. What they didn't expect was that I would thrive inside that silence, that I would build something not out of revenge but out of reality. I poured a glass of wine, opened a new client file, and wrote one line at the top. "You're not difficult. You're just finally visible." And then I kept going. Haley Brooks learns a profound lesson about self-worth and agency through her experience with her family's business, Brooks Automotive. Initially, she equates loyalty with belonging, sacrificing personal ambitions to support a legacy that never truly valued her. Her father's voicemail coldly severing ties reveals the harsh truth: her role was always utilitarian, her presence invisible unless useful. This betrayal shifts her perspective, teaching her that true power lies not in silent compliance, but in reclaiming her autonomy. By meticulously documenting discrepancies and withdrawing her name from the loan, Haley realizes that love and loyalty cannot be earned through self-erasure. Her actions, removing herself from the business and exposing its mismanagement, reflect a newfound clarity she owes herself the visibility her family denied her. The lesson is not about revenge, but about recognizing her own value and refusing to let others exploit it. Haley's move to Seattle and her work with women-led startups signify a life built on authenticity where she thrives, not in spite of her family's rejection, but because of the strength she finds in claiming her own narrative.
The call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was reviewing acquisition reports for my latest property development when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Hello, this is Victoria Manning from Elegant Events Planning," the voice said, dripping with practiced sweetness. "I'm calling regarding the Henderson wedding this Saturday." Henderson. My maiden name. The name I'd left behind 3 years ago when I'd finally had enough of my family's constant dismissal and manipulation. "Yes," I said simply, setting down my pen. "Well, I have some unfortunate news," Victoria continued, her tone shifting to something more dismissive. "You're uninvited from the wedding. Family's orders. I'm sorry, but there's been a change in the guest list." I leaned back in my leather chair, looking out at the Chicago skyline from my corner office on the 47th floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the construction crews working on the new Anderson Plaza, another addition to my real estate empire that my family knew nothing about. "I understand," I said calmly. "Great. Well, that makes this easier than I thought." Victoria's relief was palpable. "I was told you might make a scene or something. Anyway, have a nice day." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a moment, then laughed. A genuine, surprised laugh that echoed through my empty office. They'd actually done it. My own sister had uninvited me from her wedding, the wedding that was being held at Grandview Manor, the premier wedding venue in the city. The venue I'd purchased 6 months ago through my holding company, Morrison Properties LLC. My assistant David knocked on the door. "Ms. Anderson? Your 3 p.m. is here." "Cancel it," I said, still smiling. "And get me the file on the Grandview Manor acquisition." 20 minutes later my phone rang again. Same number. "Hello. Ms. Anderson." Victoria's voice was completely different now, high-pitched, panicked. "I am so sorry for the confusion earlier. I had no idea. I mean, we didn't know that you own the entire venue. Please tell me we can work this out. The wedding is tomorrow." I let the silence stretch for a moment, listening to her rapid breathing. "Victoria," I said finally, "I think we need to talk." Yes, absolutely. Can you come in? Or I can come to you. Whatever works best for you, Ms. Anderson. You're the owner, after all, and I am just mortified about this misunderstanding. I'll be there in an hour." Grandview Manor sat on 12 pristine acres in Highland Park, about 30 minutes north of downtown Chicago. I'd fallen in love with the property the moment I saw it, a restored 1920s mansion with manicured gardens, a ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests, and enough smaller rooms for intimate ceremonies. It was the kind of place where Chicago's elite held their most important celebrations. I'd bought it not for sentiment but because it was a smart investment. The venue was booked solid for 2 years in advance, with couples paying anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000 for their dream wedding. What I hadn't expected was for my sister Emma to book it for her wedding to Bradley Ashworth III, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune and, according to my mother, finally someone worthy of the Henderson name. Victoria was waiting for me in the main lobby, practically wringing her hands. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 28, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Ms. Anderson," she rushed forward as soon as she saw me. "I cannot apologize enough for what happened on the phone. I had absolutely no idea that you were the owner. Your sister simply told me that you weren't welcome and asked me to handle the situation." "What exactly did Emma tell you about me?" I asked, following her into the main office. Victoria looked uncomfortable. "She said you were the family disappointment, that you dropped out of the family business to pursue some failed startup, and that your presence would be embarrassing for their guests." I almost laughed again. Failed startup. If only they knew. 3 years ago, I had worked for Henderson Financial Group, my father's investment firm. I'd been the dutiful daughter, putting in 60-hour weeks, generating millions in revenue, all while being treated like an intern by my father and older brother Marcus. Every idea I pitched was dismissed, every success I achieved was attributed to someone else, and every mistake, no matter how small, was magnified and used as evidence that I didn't have what it took to be a real Henderson. The breaking point came when I discovered that Marcus had been taking credit for my work on a major municipal bond deal, a deal that earned the firm $12 million in fees. When I confronted my father about it, he told me I was being emotional and should focus on learning from my brother instead of competing with him. So I left. I took my savings, my contacts, and my ideas, and I disappeared from their world entirely. What they didn't know was that I'd been building something much bigger than they could have imagined. "Victoria," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk, "tell me about tomorrow's wedding." He pulled out a thick folder. "It's going to be beautiful. 250 guests, ceremony in the Rose Garden at 4 p.m., cocktail hour on the terrace, reception in the grand ballroom. The Ashworth family spared no expense. This is easily a $180,000 event. And Emma specifically said I wasn't welcome? She was very clear about it. She said, and I quote, 'Under no circumstances is my sister to be allowed anywhere near this wedding. She's already embarrassed our family enough, and I won't have her ruining the most important day of my life.'" I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly. More like clarity. "Victoria, I need you to call Emma. Tell her there's been a problem with the venue for tomorrow." "A problem? But everything's perfect. The flowers are being delivered in the morning, the catering staff is confirmed, the band has already done their sound check. Tell her the venue has been double booked, and we need to discuss alternative arrangements." Victoria's face went pale. But that's not true. And even if it were, we couldn't possibly find another venue of this caliber with less than 24 hours notice. Not for a wedding of this size and importance. "I know," I said simply. It took Victoria a moment to understand what I was really asking her to do. When it hit her, her eyes widened. "Ms. Anderson, you can't be serious. Make the call." My phone rang 15 minutes later. "What do you mean the venue is double booked?" Emma's voice was shrill enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Emma," I said calmly. "Don't you Emma to me. This is a disaster. Do you have any idea how much money we've spent on this wedding? The flowers alone cost $15,000. And now you're telling me some incompetent wedding planner screwed up the booking. Actually, there wasn't a mistake in the booking." Silence. "What do you mean?" "I mean Victoria called you because I asked her to. You see, Emma, I own Grandview Manor. I have for the past 6 months. More silence. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You're barely scraping by with your little computer business. Little computer business. If she only knew. Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have 2 choices. You can apologize for uninviting me from your wedding, your sister, and we can pretend this conversation never happened. Or you can find somewhere else to get married tomorrow. You're bluffing. This is some kind of sick joke. You probably called pretending to be the venue owner just to mess with me. Check the property records, Emma. Morrison Properties LLC purchased Grandview Manor in April. Morrison Properties is my company." I could hear her breathing heavily. "Even if that's true, which I don't believe, you wouldn't actually cancel my wedding. You're not that cruel." "You're right," I said. "I'm not cruel. I'm just not interested in hosting events for people who consider me an embarrassment to the family. This is insane. I'm calling Dad. He'll straighten this out. Please do. The line went dead. My phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time it was my father. Sophia, what the hell is going on? Emma is hysterical, claiming you own some wedding venue and you're trying to sabotage her wedding. Hi Dad. How have you been? It's been almost 2 years since we last spoke. Don't play games with me. Emma says you're threatening to cancel her wedding venue. I'm not threatening anything. I simply informed her that as the owner of Grandview Manor, I have the right to choose which events I host. Silence. Then, you own Grandview Manor. Among other properties, yes. How? You left Henderson Financial with nothing. You had maybe $50,000 in savings. I had more than savings, Dad. I had 3 years' worth of contacts from working at your firm. I had a deep understanding of Chicago's real estate market from all those municipal bond deals I worked on, the ones Marcus took credit for. And I had something else you never bothered to notice. I had talent. This is ridiculous. Even if you somehow managed to buy one property, Grandview Manor is worth at least $8 million. There's no way you could afford something like that. Dad, do you remember the Millennium Development Project? The one where the city needed $200 million in financing for the new cultural district. Of course. That was Marcus's deal. One of his biggest successes. No, Dad. That was my deal. I spent 8 months building the relationship with the city planning committee. I structured the entire financing package. I negotiated the terms with the contractors. Marcus just signed the papers and took the photo for the company newsletter. That's not. And the Patterson Industrial Acquisition? The one that earned Henderson Financial a $15 million fee? That was mine too. I identified the company as an acquisition target, I built the financial models, I pitched the deal to Patterson's board. Marcus presented my work and got a promotion. I could hear him breathing heavily. For 3 years I built your business while you and Marcus took all the credit and told me I wasn't smart enough, wasn't aggressive enough, wasn't a real Henderson. So I left and I started over. The difference is, this time I kept the credit for my own work. Even so, one property doesn't make you some kind of real estate mogul. I pulled out the folder David had prepared for me earlier. Morrison Properties currently owns 17 commercial properties in the Chicago metropolitan area, with a combined value of approximately $180 million. We also hold majority stakes in 3 development projects that will break ground next year. And we're currently in negotiations to acquire the Henderson Financial Group building. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Dad. You're trying to buy our building? I already made the offer. Your landlord seemed very interested. Something about Henderson Financial being 3 months behind on rent. Another long silence. What do you want, Sophia? I want my family to treat me with the same respect they show strangers on the street. I want Emma to apologize for uninviting me from her wedding. And I want all of you to stop pretending I'm some kind of failure just because I chose to succeed outside of your little kingdom. And if Emma apologizes, if we acknowledge that we misjudged your situation, then she has a beautiful wedding at one of the most exclusive venues in Chicago, and we all move forward like a real family. And if she doesn't? I looked out the window of the venue office, where a team of gardeners was putting the finishing touches on the rose garden where Emma's ceremony was supposed to take place tomorrow. Then she spends the next 18 hours trying to find somewhere else to get married. This is blackmail. No, Dad. This is business. Something I learned from you, actually. He hung up without saying goodbye. An hour later, Emma called back. Her voice was quieter now, less hysterical. Sophia. Yes. Mom says I should apologize. What do you think? A long pause. I think I don't understand how this happened. How you went from being our family's disappointment to owning half of Chicago without any of us knowing about it. I went from being your scapegoat to being successful. There's a difference. We really hurt you, didn't we? It was the first time any of my family members had acknowledged that their treatment of me might have been unfair. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of resentment I'd been carrying for 3 years. Yeah, Emma. You really did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for uninviting you, and I'm sorry for calling your business a failure, and I'm sorry for all of it. I don't know how to fix this, but I want you at my wedding. If you'll still come. I thought about it. I could make her grovel more. I could demand apologies from the rest of the family, Make them acknowledge every slight, every dismissive comment, every time they'd made me feel small and worthless. But Emma was still my sister. And underneath all the entitlement and casual cruelty, I could hear something I hadn't heard in years. Genuine remorse. "I'll be there," I said finally. "Really? Really? But Emma?" "Yeah. This conversation never happened. As far as anyone knows tomorrow, I'm just another wedding guest who happens to appreciate fine venues." "I understand. And Sophia?" "Thank you." The next day I arrived at Grandview Manor at 3:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the ceremony. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that was elegant but not attention-grabbing, paired with understated jewelry. I wanted to blend in, not make a statement. But as I walked through the main entrance, I couldn't help but feel a quiet pride looking around at the venue I'd restored and transformed into Chicago's premier wedding destination. Emma looked beautiful in her wedding dress, a custom creation that probably cost more than most people's cars. When she saw me, she broke away from her bridesmaids and hurried over. "Sophia, you came." "Of course I came. You look stunning, Emma." "Thank you. And thank you for everything. The venue is absolutely perfect. I'm glad you're happy with it." She hesitated for a moment, then leaned in closer. "Can I ask you something? Are you really as successful as you told Dad yesterday?" I smiled. "More successful, actually. But let's talk about that another time. Today is about you and Bradley." The ceremony was beautiful. Emma and Bradley exchanged vows in the rose garden under a perfect September sky, surrounded by family and friends who had no idea that the venue owner was sitting in the third row, watching her sister marry into one of Chicago's most prominent families. During the cocktail hour, I found myself in conversations with several of the guests, many of whom, it turned out, were potential clients for my development projects. By the time dinner was served, I had 3 new business cards and 2 meeting requests for the following week. My father approached me during the reception, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo. "Sophia. Dad. Can we talk?" We walked out to the terrace, away from the noise of the party. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "For what specifically?" He winced at the directness of the question. "For underestimating you. For taking you for granted. For letting Marcus take credit for your work. And for making you feel like you had to choose between being part of this family and being successful." I studied his face. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, more worn down. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Did you know Marcus was taking credit for my deals?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I suspected. But you didn't stop it." I told myself it was character building. That you needed to learn to fight for recognition. "What you really thought was that Marcus deserved the credit more than I did because he was your son and heir, and I was just the daughter who would eventually get married and leave the business anyway." He didn't deny it. "I'm proud of what you've built, Sophia. Truly. I just wish." "What?" "I wish we could have built it together." I looked back through the windows at the reception, where Emma was dancing with her new husband while their friends and family celebrated around them. It was the kind of life I'd once thought I wanted, the approval of my family, a place in their world, their recognition of my worth. "Dad, I want to show you something." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, showing him the account balances for Morrison Properties and its subsidiaries. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the numbers. "Jesus Christ, Sophia. You're worth more than Henderson Financial Group. More than the Ashworth family. More than anyone at this wedding, actually." "How?" "The same way you built your business, Dad. One deal at a time. Except I did it without anyone's help and without anyone taking credit for my work." We stood in silence for a while, listening to the music and laughter drifting out from the ballroom. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now Emma has a beautiful wedding at a venue she'll always remember. And maybe if you're interested we can have a conversation about what it might look like for Henderson Financial to work with Morrison Properties on some upcoming projects. You'd be willing to do business with us?" "After everything. I'd be willing to do business with you, Dad. But as equals. Not as the daughter who needs her father's approval, but as the CEO of a company that might benefit from a partnership." He nodded slowly. "I think I'd like that." "Good. Have your people call my people on Monday." He laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. "When did you become so Ruthless? I learned from the best. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, I found myself saying goodbye to Emma one last time. "Thank you," she said, hugging me tightly. "For everything. For the venue, for coming, for not letting me ruin this completely." "You didn't ruin anything, Emma. You just learned something important about making assumptions about people." "What's that?" "That you never really know what someone is capable of until you give them a reason to show you." I drove home to my penthouse apartment, thinking about the events of the last 24 hours. My family had spent 3 years assuming I was a failure, that I'd thrown away my potential and embarrassed the Henderson name by leaving their world behind. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't thrown anything away. I'd invested it all, my talent, my knowledge, my connections, and yes, my anger, into building something bigger and better than anything they'd ever dreamed of. The wedding was just the beginning. On Monday, I had meetings with 3 major developers, a city planning session for the new cultural district expansion, and a conference call with investors about the Morrison Properties IPO we were planning for next year. But tonight I was just Sophia Anderson, the woman who owned the most beautiful wedding venue in Chicago and who had finally gotten the apology she deserved from the family who had never believed in her. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's also the beginning of something better than revenge. Reconciliation built on respect instead of assumption, love tempered with understanding, and a family that finally sees you for who you really are instead of who they thought you should be. As I fell asleep that night, I smiled thinking about Victoria's panicked phone call earlier that day. She had no idea that her mistake had given me something I didn't even know I wanted. The chance to show my family that the daughter they'd dismissed as a failure had become the woman who could make or break their most important moments with a single phone call. Tomorrow we would all wake up in a different world, one where Sophia Henderson was no longer the family disappointment, but Sophia Anderson, CEO of Morrison Properties, and the woman who had turned her family's dismissal into the motivation to build an empire they never saw coming. And honestly, that felt better than any wedding I'd ever attended. The call came at 6:23 a.m. on a Tuesday, just as the morning shift nurse was checking my 4. I'd been in the hospital for 3 days following a car accident that had left me with a broken leg, 2 fractured ribs, and a concussion that still made the room spin if I moved too quickly. "Sophia." My brother Marcus's voice was strained, panicked. "Thank God you answered." "Marcus? What's wrong?" I asked, trying to sit up despite the pain shooting through my ribs. "Mom. She collapsed at home last night. They rushed her to Mercy General and she needs emergency heart surgery." My blood went cold. "Is she okay? What happened?" "Massive heart attack. The doctors say she needs a triple bypass, but there are complications. They want to do some experimental procedure that insurance won't cover." I closed my eyes, trying to process this information through the fog of pain medication. "How much does it cost?" $50,000. "We need it today, Sophia. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning." 50,000? I felt dizzy, and not just from the concussion. "I know it's a lot of money, but we don't have a choice. I've called everyone in the family. Dad's retirement savings only cover 20,000. I can scrape together maybe 10,000 from my business account. We need you to wire us the rest." I looked around my hospital room, at the machines monitoring my vital signs, at the flowers my assistant had sent, at the stack of get well cards from employees I'd told everyone I barely knew. "Marcus, I'm in the hospital myself right now." What happened?" "Car accident on Saturday. Broken leg, fractured ribs, concussion. I'm not exactly in a position to handle financial transactions right now." There was a pause. "Sophia, this is Mom we're talking about. Can't you just use your phone to transfer the money?" I almost laughed, despite everything. Marcus thought I could just casually wire $20,000 from my personal account like it was pocket change. He had no idea that the woman he thought was barely making ends meet as a freelance graphic designer actually had $47 million in liquid assets. But he also had no idea that I'd been anonymously covering Mom's medical expenses for the past 2 years. "I can't right now, Marcus." "What do you mean you can't?" "Sophia, Mom could die. I understand the seriousness of the situation, but I can't wire money right now." "Why not? It's just a phone app." I tried to think of how to explain without revealing the truth. The truth was that I'd been secretly paying Mom's medical bills through a foundation I'd established. Her cardiologist bills, her medication costs, her previous emergency room visits. all covered by anonymous donations from the Helping Hearts Foundation. What Marcus didn't know was that Mom's surgery had already been paid for. Every penny of it, including the experimental procedure that insurance wouldn't cover. I'd made the arrangements 12 hours ago from my hospital bed after Dr. Patterson called to inform me, as her emergency contact, about her condition. Marcus, I can't transfer money because I'm heavily medicated and can barely think straight. Then give me your banking information. I'll do it myself. I'm not giving you access to my bank accounts. Are you kidding me? This is Mom's life we're talking about. And this is my life I'm trying to recover from. I was in a near-fatal car accident 3 days ago. Sophia, stop making this about you. Mom needs $50,000 right now, and you're the only person in this family who might have that kind of money saved up. I almost choked on the irony. Marcus thought I might have $50,000 saved up. In reality, I could buy the entire hospital if I wanted to. I don't have $50,000 just sitting around, Marcus. Then get a loan. Use credit cards. Sell something. Figure it out. The desperation in his voice was real, and it made my chest tight with guilt. He genuinely believed Mom's life hung in the balance, and he saw me as the selfish sister who was refusing to help. I can't right now. You're heartless, he screamed into the phone. Our mother is dying and you're worried about your own problems. The line went dead. I lay back against my pillows, staring at the ceiling and trying not to cry. The nurse who had been pretending not to listen finally spoke up. Honey, are you okay? Family drama, I said weakly. My brother thinks I'm a terrible person. Is your mother really having heart surgery? Yes. And it's already paid for. He just doesn't know that. The nurse raised an eyebrow. Why doesn't he know? I looked at her, this kind woman who had been taking care of me for 3 days without knowing that her patient was actually the CEO of Chin Digital Solutions, a tech company worth $340 million. Because my family thinks I'm poor. Are you? I gestured around the private hospital room with its panoramic city view and premium amenities. Do I look poor to you? She smiled. I was wondering how a freelance graphic designer could afford the penthouse suite. Over the next hour, 3 more family members called. My sister Ashley crying and begging me to find the money somewhere. My cousin Jennifer lecturing me about family obligations. Dad quietly asking if there was any way I could help. To each of them I gave the same answer. I couldn't help right now. By noon my phone was buzzing with text messages. Marcus, I can't believe you're abandoning Mom when she needs you most. Ashley, we're going to lose her because you're selfish. Dad, disappointed in you, Sophia. This isn't how we raised you. I was reading through the messages when my assistant, David, knocked on the hospital room door. Miss Chin, I brought the documents you requested. David was one of the few people who knew about my complicated relationship with my family. He'd been with me for 3 years and had helped me set up the anonymous foundation that had been covering Mom's medical expenses. How is she doing? I asked. Your mother? The surgery went very well. Dr. Patterson says the experimental procedure was a complete success. She's expected to make a full recovery. The surgery already happened? This morning at 10 a.m. The Helping Hearts Foundation covered all expenses, just as you arranged last night. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. And the family? Is still at the hospital, apparently trying to figure out how to pay for a surgery that's already been completed and paid for. David handed me his tablet. The hospital billing department is confused about how to handle this. The family keeps insisting they need to arrange payment, but the bills show 0 balance due. I scrolled through the medical records. Mom's surgery had cost $73,000, not the $50,000 Marcus had quoted. The experimental procedure alone was $35,000. Every penny had been covered by my foundation. What did the hospital tell them? That an anonymous benefactor had covered all expenses. The family is demanding to know who the donor is. My phone rang. Marcus again. Sophia, something weird is happening. What do you mean? The hospital says Mom's surgery was paid for by some anonymous donor. They won't tell us who it was. That's wonderful news. Is she okay? She's fine, but that's not the point. Someone paid $73,000 for Mom's surgery, and we don't know who. Does it matter? She got the surgery she needed. Of course it matters. We need to thank whoever did this. We need to know who spent that much money on our mother. I looked at David, who was trying not to smile. Marcus, maybe you should just be grateful that someone helped when the family couldn't pull together the money. We could have pulled it together. If you hadn't been so selfish about your savings. My savings wouldn't have covered a $73,000 surgery anyway. But if you'd contributed your part, we could have made it work. I realized Marcus was more upset about the anonymous donor than he was relieved about Mom's successful surgery. His pride was hurt that someone outside the family had stepped in to help. Marcus, Mom is alive and healthy. That's what matters. No, what matters is that some stranger thinks our family can't take care of our own mother. Maybe that stranger was right. The words slipped out before I could stop them. What's that supposed to mean? It means that when Mom needed help, the family's solution was to yell at the one member who was in the hospital herself. You could have helped if you wanted to. Could I? Because I'm pretty sure I told you I was heavily medicated and recovering from major injuries, and your response was to call me heartless. There was a long pause. Sophia, if you had just explained that you didn't have the money. I did explain. Multiple times. You decided not to believe me. Because you always act like you're broke when we know you have some savings. I almost laughed. Some savings. If only he knew that his broke sister had more money than the rest of the family combined. Marcus, what if I told you that the anonymous donor was someone who cared about Mom and wanted to help? I'd say that person should have identified themselves so we could properly thank them. And what if I told you that person didn't want thanks? They just wanted Mom to be healthy. I'd say that's weird and suspicious. David was shaking his head, clearly frustrated with my brother's attitude. Marcus, I'm going to hang up now. I'm glad Mom is okay, but I need to focus on my own recovery. Sophia, wait. There's something else. What? The doctors want to know about Mom's medical history. They say someone has been paying her bills anonymously for 2 years. Her cardiologist, her medications, everything. My heart started racing. What did you tell them? That we don't know anything about it. But Sophia, who has been paying Mom's medical bills. And why didn't she tell us? I closed my eyes. Maybe she didn't want you to worry about the money. Or maybe she was embarrassed that her family couldn't afford to take care of her. Marcus, you're looking at this all wrong. How should I look at it? Like someone who loves Mom has been making sure she gets the best possible care without putting financial strain on the family. But who? And why won't they tell us who they are? David was gesturing at his tablet, pointing to something that had just come in. Marcus, I have to go. The nurse needs to do something. Sophia, one more thing. What? I'm sorry I called you heartless. I was scared about Mom and I took it out on you. I understand. But I still think you could have found a way to help if you really wanted to. After he hung up, I looked at David. What were you trying to show me? The hospital administration wants to meet with you tomorrow. Why? Because they've figured out the connection between the anonymous donor and their patient. They want to discuss establishing a more formal arrangement for your mother's ongoing care. How did they figure it out? You're listed as her emergency contact, and you're the founder of the Helping Hearts Foundation. It wasn't exactly hard to put together. I sighed. So much for anonymity. Miss Chen, if I may, why don't you just tell your family the truth? I looked out the window at the city skyline, at the empire I'd built while my family thought I was struggling to pay rent. Because I wanted to know if they'd love me when they thought I couldn't help them. And now you know? Now I know that my brother would rather be angry at me than grateful to an anonymous benefactor. That tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. The next morning, Dr. Richardson, the hospital administrator, came to see me. Miss Chen, I understand you've been covering your mother's medical expenses. Through my foundation, yes. She doesn't know? No one in my family knows. May I ask why? I explained the situation. How I'd built a successful tech company while letting my family believe I was struggling, how I'd wanted to help Mom without revealing my success, how the anonymous donations had seemed like the perfect solution. And now my brother thinks I'm selfish for not contributing to a surgery I already paid for. Dr. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. Your mother is asking to see you. She knows I'm here? She knows her daughter was in a car accident. She doesn't know her daughter is also her anonymous benefactor. An hour later, Mom was wheeled into my room in a wheelchair, looking pale but alert. Dad and Marcus were with her, both wearing expressions of concern mixed with curiosity. Mija, Mom said, tears in her eyes. I was so worried when I heard about your accident. I'm okay, Mom. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck but alive. She reached for my hand. The doctors say I'm going to be fine. Someone paid for my surgery. Some anonymous donor. Can you believe that? I squeezed her hand gently. I'm glad you're okay. That's all that matters. But who would do such a thing? $73,000 for someone they don't even know. Marcus stepped forward. Mom, maybe they do know you. Maybe it's someone who's been watching out for you. But who? And why won't they tell us who they are? I looked at Mom, this woman who had raised me and worried about me and never known that her youngest daughter had become more successful than she'd ever imagined. Mom, what if I told you that the anonymous donor was someone who loves you very much? I'd want to thank them properly. And what if I told you that person didn't want thanks? They just wanted you to be healthy and not worry about money? I'd say that person has a good heart, but they should let family take care of family. Dad nodded. We may not be rich, but we take care of our own. Even when your own is in the hospital herself? I asked quietly. The room went silent. Sophia, Marcus said carefully, what are you trying to say? I looked around at my family, at Mom in her wheelchair, at Dad standing protectively beside her, at Marcus who had called me heartless 12 hours earlier. I'm saying that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones you least expect to be able to help. Sophia, Mom said, her voice confused, do you know who the anonymous donor is? I met her eyes and smiled. Mom, I am the anonymous donor. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the machines beeping in the hallway. What? Marcus whispered. I've been paying your medical bills for 2 years, Mom. Through a foundation I established. The heart surgery, all of it, that was me. Dad sank into the visitor's chair. Sophia, that's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. I have a tech company, Dad. It's worth about $340 million. 300. Mom couldn't finish the sentence. 40 million, I completed. I'm the CEO of Chin Digital Solutions. We develop software for Fortune 500 companies. Marcus was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. But you're a graphic designer. I was a graphic designer when I started the company. Now I'm a CEO with 200 employees and offices in 4 states. And you've been paying Mom's medical bills? For 2 years. I didn't want her to worry about money when she was worried about her health. Mom was crying now. Mija, why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to help without making it about my success. I wanted to take care of you quietly, the way family should take care of each other. But we could have been proud of you, Dad said. We could have celebrated your success. Could you? Because when I needed help yesterday, Marcus called me heartless for not contributing to a surgery I'd already paid for. Marcus looked stricken. Sophia, I didn't know. That's the point, Marcus. You didn't know, so you assumed the worst about me. I was scared about Mom. I was scared too. But I was also lying in a hospital bed with broken bones, and instead of asking if I was okay, you demanded money. Mom reached for my hand again. Sophia, I'm so sorry. We've been terrible to you. You haven't been terrible. You've been human. But maybe now you understand why I kept my success private. Over the next hour we talked more honestly than we had in years. I told them about building my company, about the sleepless nights and the risks and the satisfaction of creating something meaningful. They told me about their fears and assumptions and their struggle to understand why I'd hidden my success. I want to pay you back, Mom said. Mom, you can't pay me back $300,000 in medical expenses. 300,000? Dad's voice cracked. 2 years of cardiac care adds up quickly. Sophia, why would you spend that much money on me? I looked at my mother, this woman who had sacrificed so much for her children, who had worried about my career and my future while I was secretly building an empire. Because you're my mom and I love you and I never want you to choose between your health and your financial security. Marcus was crying now too. Sophia, I'm so sorry I called you heartless. You're the most generous person I know. I'm also the person who needed my family's support yesterday and got yelled at instead. How can we make this right? Dad asked. I looked around at my family, these flawed human people who had finally learned the truth about their daughter and sister. By letting me take care of Mom's medical expenses without making it weird. by being proud of my success instead of intimidated by it, and by remembering that family takes care of each other in whatever way they can. And if we can't afford to reciprocate? I smiled. Dad, love isn't a transaction. I don't help Mom because I expect something back. I help her because I can, and because she raised me to be someone who would want to help. As I watched my family begin to understand who I really was, I realized that sometimes the most expensive gift you can give someone isn't money. Sometimes it's the gift of knowing that someone loves you enough to take care of you, even when you don't know they're doing it. The anonymous donor had a name, and it was Daughter.